going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Must start and avoid running backs for week 15. As I mentioned last week, the rankings and the models are free for the rest of the season. So if you have a question that I do not answer in this video, then just look at the rankings. I typically go through and update them on Thursdays, and then I do smaller edits after that. So if you're looking on Wednesday or something like that, it's not the final version. Keep checking back until kickoff. So, that being said, let's start things off with the Thursday night game, which features the Jets at the Ravens. This game has a 45-point total, and the Ravens are massive 14.5-point home favorites. For the Jets, we're going to have to see if Le'Veon Bell is healthy enough to play this week. Assuming that he's back, he's obviously the only one you can start. If he were to miss the game, then Powell will be flex viable, and Montgomery will be more of a fringe play if you're really desperate, someone you probably shouldn't have to rely on this late in the season. For the Ravens, it's the same as always. Ingram is the only back you can trust, and he's heavily dependent on touchdowns, so understand the floor when you're going to play him. But with that being said, you should probably always be starting Mark Ingram for that upside. Seahawks at Panthers is the next game, and this one has a 48.5-point total, so pretty high total on this week, and the Seahawks are 6-point road favorites. For Seattle, Penny is done for the season with a torn ACL, which means Carson will be a high-end running back one for the remainder of the season, especially this week against the Panthers, who rank 32nd in rush defense DVOA and 29th in yards per carry allowed, and with this being one of the higher total games on the week. So absolutely play him everywhere. For the Panthers, obviously, you're starting Christian McCaffrey. Eagles at Washington is the next one, and this game has a 40.5-point total, and the Eagles are 6-point road favorites. For the Eagles, we again need to see if Jordan Howard will be cleared for contact. He's missed a few games in a row, and there's really no indication how long it's going to be. We're just going to have to wait and see. Assuming that he misses another game, then you can start Miles Sanders once again. He's a pretty big road favorite against a fairly mediocre run defense, and he's been heavily involved in the passing game. So I definitely look to start him if Jordan Howard were to miss again. Assuming that Howard plays, we're just going to have to see how much the team and how much beat writers expect him to play, and I'll update the rankings accordingly. For Washington, Darius Geis has already been ruled out for week 15, which leaves us with Adrian Peterson and Chris Thompson. Peterson had 20 carries and 0 targets on Sunday, while Thompson had 0 carries and 8 targets. So they basically combined for a bell cow, but they completely split. Peterson's getting the rushing work, Thompson's getting the receiving work, and there will be very little overlap between those two. Thompson will be viable in full PPR leagues, but I wouldn't play him in anything less than full PPR. For Peterson, he's a lower end flex play in basically all formats. Obviously, you prefer him in standard and you really don't want to play him in full PPR, but you're basically going to need him to score a touchdown to be worth playing. So if you have better options, then I would prefer to leave him on the bench or leave him on free agency if he's there. If you need someone, though, it's not a terrible option because we've seen he's got 20 touch upside. Texans at Titans is the next game, and this one's got a 50-point total, which is the highest on the week, and the Titans are 2.5-point home favorites. They win this game, they take over first in the AFC South. For the Texans, I don't trust Carlos Hyde enough to start as anything more than a desperation flex play. He's not involved in the receiving game, and the Titans do have a solid run defense. The same thing kind of goes for Duke Johnson. Obviously, he's involved more in the receiving game, and he's been used more as of late. But also, if you look at the numbers last week, know that they were down like 30 points pretty quickly in the game. So he's just a pretty thin play. I don't trust either of them for for the fantasy playoffs. If you really need to start someone, I guess I'd be fine with Duke Johnson in a full PPR league or Carlos Hyde in half PPR or standard. But again, I don't love it. As for the Titans, always start Derrick Henry. Dolphins at Giants is the next one, and this game has a 47.5 point total with the Giants as 3-point home favorites. For the Dolphins, Patrick Laird is averaging 17.5 touches per game over the last 2 weeks, and it was on 82% of snaps last week. So with Ballage done for the season, basically all of the running back workload is going to Laird. Gaskin is not getting much work at all, so Laird is viable in the flex moving forward, especially since his receiving game role makes him game script proof, which is nice for the Dolphins because they lose a lot of games. Although I will say in this one, certainly possible for them to pull out the victory. For the Giants, Saquon has been very disappointing this season, but you have to start him, especially in the best possible matchup for running back. Broncos at Kansas City is next. This one has a 45.5 point total with the Chiefs 10.5 point home favorites. For the Broncos, Lindsey and Freeman continue to split the snaps, but Lindsey has been getting more total volume and he does have more touchdown upside. This game also sets up much better for Lindsey than it does for Freeman. The Broncos are likely to be trailing in this one, and Lindsey is the better receiving back. Given Freeman's recent volume, I don't think you can start him in any format, while Lindsey is more of a mid-range running back too, given the fact that he might see extra work in the receiving game if they fall behind, which, by looking at the 10.5 point spread, seems likely. For Kansas City, we'll have to see if Damian Williams is healthy enough to play in this one. They really don't want to give McCoy all that much volume, and they still don't trust Darwin Thompson all that much. Assuming that Williams is out this week, then McCoy is viable in the flex. Just know that he's going to need to get his upside through touchdowns because they do not want to give him 20 touches. And then Darwin would be viable in the flex in deeper formats, but still not a great play. If Williams were to play, then we're just going to need to wait and see what people expect his workload to be. And then, of course, I'll adjust the rankings to reflect his expected involvement. Patriots at Bengals is the next game. This one has a very low 40.5 point total, and the Patriots are 8.5 point road favorites. For the Patriots, this is one of the best possible matchups for running back, and everyone has upside against the Bengals defense, especially on the ground. They are favored by more than a touchdown, so this does set up more like a Sony Michel game than it does a James White game, but it's still very difficult to trust Sony Michel in full PPR leagues. In standard, I think he's fine because he's pretty likely to score a touchdown. There's going to be at least one drive where they get down close, and he's got opportunities in the red zone. Will he convert them? We're going to have to wait and see, but he will be getting opportunities in the red zone. So in standard and half point, I think Michel is fine in the flex. I'd really prefer to look elsewhere in full PPR. For James White, again, I said this is more of a Sony Michel game, so James White is likely to see a little bit less volume in the receiving game. And because of that, I think he's a solid flex play in basically any format, but he gets better as you move from standard to half and to full PPR. For the Bengals, Mixon is the only guy you can really consider, but I would personally try and find someone else to start. The Patriots are an elite defense, and they rarely give up notable stat lines to running backs, but let's be honest, how many of you made the fantasy playoffs having Joe Mixon as your lead guy? You probably found someone else to start, so I might be looking to start them instead. Buccaneers at Detroit is the next game, and this one has a 47.5 point total, with the Bucs actually being 4 point road favorites. I was a little surprised that it was that high in favor of the Bucs. For Tampa Bay, just stay away from everyone. None of them are getting more than 40% of the snaps, and Ronald Jones is really the only one you could consider starting, but he's been benched in back-to-back weeks for missing blocks, so I would just skip this backfield entirely, and I would do the same thing for the Lions. This is the single most difficult matchup for running back, and it's not like they have anyone you really need to start. So I would stay away from this entire game as far as running backs are concerned. Bears at Packers is next, and this one has a very low 41-point over-under, and it features the Packers as 4-point home favorites. Probably going to be a better football game than a fantasy game. For the Bears, Montgomery is a better play when the Bears are favored, but he's still a volume-based running back too. The targets have been lower lately, which is concerning, but he's getting enough total volume to be worth starting, and he is the guy they're always going to use when they get close to scoring, especially against the Packers defense that ranks 28th in rush defense DVOA and 25th in yards per carry allowed. I am fine still starting him as a road underdog. Tariq Cohen is also fine to start, but I would definitely prefer to do that in a full PPR league because it's a pretty thin play under any other format. For the Packers, Aaron Jones remains a low-end running back 1, and you guys basically know the drill at this point. He has got one of, if not the, highest ceiling of any running back this season because of how much they use him when they get close, how high his touchdown ceiling is. It's a little bit lower in a game with a 41-point total, but it's certainly still there. Just know it comes with an incredibly low floor when he doesn't score a touchdown. Jamal Williams had a pretty mediocre game last week, but I'd chalk that up to the game being ugly in general. I think he's still fine to play in the flex. Just remember that he has far less touchdown upside than Jones. Jaguars at Raiders is the next game, and this one is a 45.5-point total with the Raiders 6-point home favorites. For the Jaguars, always start Leonard Fournette. For the Raiders, if Jacobs is active, then start him. If he's not active, then start DeAndre Washington. The Jaguars are one of the worst run defenses in the league, and the Raiders are home favorites as a team that loves to run the ball. So that is a perfect setup for running back. Browns at Cardinals is the next game. This one is a 48-point total, and the Browns are 3-point road favorites. For the Browns, always start Nick Chubb, and Hunt is a decent play in the flex as well. He has between 9 and 15 half PPR points in each game he's played this season, and they like bringing him in when they get close to the goal line. This is a big pace-up spot for Cleveland as well, and the Cardinals rank below average in rush defense DVOA and yards per carry allowed. For the Cardinals, we've got a nice little mess on our hands. Kenyon Drake's snaps have been trending down, David Johnson's are trending up, and then Chase Edmonds is being phased in as well. Assuming the current split holds, then Drake is a low-end flex play, and the other two can't really be trusted. The problem is, I don't even trust Drake anymore because his snaps have come down in 3 straight games, and they've shown no consistency in who they choose to feature. So I would personally try and find a different option if you can. Vikings at Chargers is next, and this game opened at a 46-point total, but it's been bet down to 44.5. And then the Vikings are 2.5-point road favorites. For the Vikings, always start Dalvin Cook if he plays. For the Chargers, Melvin Gordon gets more volume and more red zone usage, so he's a high-end running back too in this matchup. Eckler sees far less work, but his touches come with far more upside, as we saw last week with his just monster performance. So while he does need to be ranked a little bit lower, it's only by a few spots. So he's more of a mid-range running back too. The matchup isn't great for them. The Vikings do have an above-average run defense, but they both get so much work in the receiving game and on the ground for Melvin Gordon that they can produce in pretty much any game script. And that's not something you can say about a lot of running backs. So Gordon's a high-end running back too, and Eckler is more of a mid-range too. Falcons at 49ers is next. We have another high total game at 47 points, and the 49ers are 10.5-point home favorites. For the Falcons, Devonta Freeman has 21 touches and 2/3 of the snaps for 2 consecutive weeks now. That sort of volume is going to make him a running back 2 regardless of the matchup. The matchup is obviously not good against the 49ers. By now, you guys obviously know that the 49ers are most attackable on the ground. They're not bad at defending running backs, but they're most attackable in that area. I would like Freeman more if he were at home, but this does still set up as a game where he should see a lot of receptions. He could get into that 5, 6, 7, 8 reception range, and if that happens, you're going to be happy you started him. So as long as things don't get too out of hand, he should be usable in this game. For the 49ers, what we thought might happen 2 weeks ago was confirmed last week. Mostert has passed Tevin Coleman on the depth chart, and Breida will be slowly reintroduced into the offense. Mostert has been extremely efficient with his touches. Obviously, don't expect him to continue with like 7 to 8 yards per carry, but it's not like he's been going off against bad defenses. We should expect both Breida and Mostert to be in that like 10 to 13 touch range, with a slight edge going to Mostert, and that makes him a low-end running back 2, with Breida being more of a flex play, and at this point, you probably don't need to own Tevin Coleman anymore. Rams at Cowboys is next, and this game has the second highest total in the week at 49 points, and while the Cowboys somehow opened as 1.5 point home favorites, that was quickly bet to 1 point home underdogs, which realistically isn't that much of a swing, but they definitely shouldn't have opened as favorites. For the Rams, they came out and said that they've been babying Gurley too much, and then we saw him get his second most touches on the season. He handled 27 touches on 80% of the snaps, and while the efficiency was still low, it's really nice to see him used more heavily. Dallas has a below average run defense, and the Rams are favored, so this is a good spot, and I would still be starting him if you have him. And for the Cowboys, obviously start Ezekiel Elliott. Bills at Steelers. This game has by far the lowest total on the week at just 36.5 points, so you know they had to make it the Sunday night game. The spread is also 2.5 points in favor of the Steelers, so basically Vegas is telling us neither of these teams is expected to score very many points, so know that when you're starting these players. The touchdown upside is lowered. As we expected last week, Singletary got up to 80% of the snaps, and he was given 17 carries and 8 targets. It's a terrible spot as a road underdog on a team projected to score less than 18 points against a defense that ranks 5th in rush defense DVOA and 9th in yards per carry allowed. With that being said, he is a pass-catching running back playing 80% of the snaps, and it also wouldn't shock anyone if the Bills were to win this game. So while he's more of a low-end running back 2 than a high-end running back 2 this week, I'd still be comfortable with starting him. For the Steelers, everything depends on whether or not James Conner plays. It's been reported that they expect him to play this week, but it's a pretty bad shoulder injury, so nothing's guaranteed. Assuming that he's out, I probably wouldn't start anyone. Benny Snell is the definition of a yardage and touchdown back, and there's very little scoring upside to be had in this one. Samuels is next in line, but he hasn't been very involved lately, so especially consider that they're starting to mix in Kareth White. I would just stay away from everyone, assuming that Connor is out. If he's active, then we're going to need to see how much the team and how much beat reporters expect him to play. And like I've said with other running backs with injury situations, I will update the rankings accordingly if they are active. The final game of the week is Monday Night Football featuring the Colts at the Saints. This game is a 45.5 point total, and the Saints are 9.5 point home favorites. For the Colts, Mack returned last week to play 41% of the snaps, and he handled 13 carries in what was a brutal matchup. The game script didn't really help Mack either. He wasn't going to get much going on the ground, and the Colts did have to keep up with Tampa Bay. The problem is, this is a bad matchup too, and the game script is also likely to be bad for Mack, and that's going to limit the amount of snaps he sees. So Mack is more of a flex option this week, but know that if somehow the Colts pull ahead and they do really well in this matchup, it's probably going to be because Marlon Mack had a really good game. For the other running backs, I'm not starting any of them unless you're in like a 16-team full PPR league. Then you can consider Nyheim Hines. But other than that, Mack's the only one you can consider. For the Saints, Kamara has been unbelievably unlucky with touchdowns this season. That will change at some point. But also, he's not being used as much when they get in close. He's still being used a lot and more than a lot of other running backs that have more touchdowns than him. But it's not like past seasons. They love using Taysom Hill near the goal line, and that's been hurting Kamara. Ultimately, doesn't really matter. You're starting him in any matchup, and you really can't start Murray while Kamara is healthy. So, that's everything you should need answered at the running back position for the second week of the playoffs. If your question was not answered in this video, like I said, the rankings are free for the rest of the season, so just check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And if you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.